The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across 500 of the city's most powerful faces as Tessa White stepped to the podium at the annual charity gala. Her hands trembled against the mahogany lectern, the microphone waiting like a loaded weapon. In the front row, Gabriel Ellsworth's hazel eyes met hers with such trust, such devastating love, that her heart nearly shattered right there on stage. 3 months ago, she had walked into his office with one mission: destroy the man who killed her father. She had the documents, the proof that Gabriel had personally signed off on the safety cuts that caused the scaffolding collapse 8 years ago. Marcus White and 2 other men had died because a 28-year-old Gabriel Ellsworth chose profits over lives in his first major project as CEO. But now, with his child growing inside her and his engagement ring hidden in her purse, Tessa faced an impossible choice. The federal investigation would expose everything within days anyway. She could flee with Detective Ray Morrison, who offered her understanding and escape. She could stay silent and let Gabriel be blindsided. Or she could take control of the narrative and destroy the man she loved to save him from something worse. Gabriel's mother, Dorothy, sat beside him, her knowing eyes filled with the heartbreak of being right about Tessa, but desperately wanting to be wrong. 500 people waited. The microphone hummed with expectation. What would you do when love means betraying everything you believed in? If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our royal story family. Your throne in this kingdom of stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of hearts colliding against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful souls just like you. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately a new story drops. Hello once again, my beautiful royal story family. I'm curious, where in this beautiful world are you watching from today? Whether you're in a bustling city where corporate towers scrape the sky, or a quiet village where secrets are harder to keep, drop your location in the comments below. 8 years ago, a 28-year-old Gabriel Ellsworth had stood in his father's former office, the ink still wet on his appointment as the youngest CEO in Ellsworth Industries history. The Riverside Construction Development Project sat before him, budgets spiraling beyond projections, board members questioning his capability at every turn. When his construction manager proposed eliminating certain safety protocols to meet deadlines and impress investors, Gabriel had hesitated for exactly 30 seconds before signing the authorization. "Prove yourself," his mother Dorothy had whispered that morning. "Show them you're worthy of the Ellsworth name." He never learned the names of the 3 men who died when the scaffolding collapsed 2 weeks later. The company's legal team had buried the incident so efficiently that Gabriel could almost pretend it never happened. Almost. Now, 8 years later, Gabriel commanded his empire from the 42nd floor of the Ellsworth Tower, his broad shoulders filling out a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. At 36, he had transformed his family's regional construction company into a multinational corporation, but the guilt from that first project lived in the shadows behind his hazel eyes. The quarterly reports need complete restructuring. Gabriel's voice cut through the boardroom like a blade as he addressed his senior staff. "I want every department's metrics reorganized and presented by Thursday." "Sir," ventured the marketing director, "that's only 3 days. Our teams will find a way to make it happen." Gabriel's tone brooked no argument. Excellence isn't achieved by accepting limitations. As the room emptied with the hushed efficiency of people accustomed to impossible demands, Gabriel's assistant, Margaret, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Ellsworth, your new executive assistant, is here for orientation." Gabriel barely glanced up from his laptop. "Send her in." Tessa White stepped into the office with the confidence of someone who belonged in rooms like this, though her heart hammered against her ribs. At 29, she possessed the kind of natural elegance that made expensive clothes unnecessary, though she had invested in a conservative navy dress that suggested competence without distraction. Her dark eyes swept the office, cataloging details. The family photos on his desk, the way he held his shoulders, the slight tremor in his left hand that suggested he relied too heavily on caffeine. Most importantly, she studied the face of the man who had killed her father. Gabriel Ellsworth was more formidable in person than in the corporate headshots she had memorized. His commanding presence filled the enormous office, and when he finally looked up from his laptop, the intensity of his gaze nearly stole her breath. She had prepared for his reputation, his demanding nature, his brilliant strategic mind. She hadn't prepared for the way her pulse quickened when those hazel eyes focused entirely on her. "Miss White." Gabriel's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I trust Margaret briefed you on my expectations?" She did. Tessa's voice remained steady despite the way he was studying her. "I've reviewed your schedule for the next month and identified several inefficiencies that could save you approximately 6 hours per week." Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly. Most assistants spent their first week learning the coffee preferences. "Show me." For the next 30 minutes, Tessa walked him through her analysis of his calendar, demonstrating how rearranging certain meetings and consolidating travel could optimize his productivity. She had done her homework obsessively, not just to impress him, but because she needed unrestricted access to his files, his meetings, his inner circle. "Impressive," Gabriel admitted, leaning back in his leather chair. "You seem overqualified for an assistant position." "I prefer to think of myself as underemployed," Tessa replied with a small smile. "I believe in exceeding expectations." Something flickered in Gabriel's eyes. Surprise, perhaps even appreciation. "We'll see about that. Margaret will show you to your desk and explain the filing system. I expect my coffee at 7:30 sharp, meetings prepared with full briefing materials, and absolute discretion about everything you see or hear in this office." "Of course, Mr. Ellsworth." As Tessa turned to leave, Gabriel called after her. "Miss White, what made you want to work at Ellsworth Industries specifically?" Tessa paused at the doorway, her hand on the frame. For a moment, she considered telling him the truth, that his company had destroyed her family, that her father's death haunted her dreams, that she had spent 2 years planning this moment. Instead, she offered the lie she had rehearsed. "I believe in working for companies that build things that matter." Gabriel nodded, already turning back to his laptop. He missed the way Tessa's knuckles whitened against the doorframe, the flash of pain that crossed her features before she smoothed them back into professional composure. Over the following weeks, Tessa embedded herself seamlessly into Gabriel's professional life. She arrived before him each morning, ensuring his coffee was precisely the temperature he preferred, and his schedule ran with clockwork efficiency. She attended meetings, taking notes with mechanical precision while internally cataloging every detail that might prove useful to her investigation. Margaret, the departing assistant, had been a grandmother figure who managed Gabriel's schedule with maternal efficiency. Tessa was something else entirely, sharp, anticipatory, and surprisingly willing to challenge his decisions when she believed they were inefficient. "You scheduled the Meridian presentation for Friday afternoon," Tessa said one Thursday morning, standing beside Gabriel's desk with his daily briefing folder. "I recommend moving it to Tuesday morning. Their CFO is notorious for making decisions when he's fresh, and Friday afternoons are when he's thinking about golf." Gabriel looked up from his computer screen, studying her face. "How do you know that about their CFO?" "I researched their entire executive team after you told me this deal was important to you." Tessa's tone was matter-of-fact, but Gabriel caught the subtle emphasis on important to you. "Most assistants would have simply scheduled the meeting when I asked." "I'm not most assistants." No, Gabriel thought, watching the way the morning light caught her dark eyes. She definitely wasn't. There was something about Tessa White that drew his attention in ways that had nothing to do with her professional competence. The way she tilted her head when she was concentrating, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the subtle defiance in her voice when she disagreed with his decisions. It was during their 3rd week working together that the first crack appeared in their professional facade. Gabriel had spent the afternoon in a particularly brutal board meeting where the directors questioned every decision he had made regarding the company's expansion into renewable energy. By 6 p.m., most of the staff had gone home, leaving the executive floor eerily quiet except for the soft clicking of Tessa's keyboard in the outer office. Gabriel emerged from his office to find her still working, a stack of financial reports spread across her desk under the harsh fluorescent lights. "You should go home," he said, loosening his tie. "Whatever you're working on can wait until tomorrow." Tessa glanced up, and Gabriel noticed the slight strain around her eyes that suggested she had been staring at numbers for hours. "I'm reorganizing the quarterly budget projections. You said they were due tomorrow." "I said I wanted them eventually. I didn't mean you should work yourself to exhaustion. I don't mind staying late." Tessa's voice carried an edge Gabriel couldn't identify. "Some things are worth the extra effort." Gabriel stepped closer to her desk, drawn by something in her tone. "This job isn't worth making yourself sick over, Miss White." Tessa's hand stilled on the keyboard. For a moment, Gabriel thought she might say something significant, something that would explain the intensity that seemed to radiate from her whenever she thought he wasn't watching. Instead, she gathered the reports into a neat stack. "I should have these finished within the hour." "Leave them." Gabriel's voice carried a note of command, but also concern. "That's an order." Tessa stood slowly, and Gabriel realized how close they were standing, close enough that he caught the subtle scent of her perfume, something warm and sophisticated that made him think of candlelight and quiet conversations. Close enough to see the way her pulse fluttered at the base of her throat. "Mr. Ellsworth," Tessa said quietly, "there are some things that can't wait." The way she said it sent an unexpected jolt through Gabriel's chest. For a moment, standing there in the empty office with the city lights glittering beyond the windows, something electric passed between them. Something that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or professional boundaries. Gabriel stepped back abruptly, unsettled by his own reaction. "Good night, Miss White." As he walked toward the elevator, Gabriel couldn't shake the feeling that Tessa White was hiding something. Something that went far deeper than her impressive qualifications or her mysterious ability to anticipate his needs. Something that made her watch him with an intensity that bordered on personal. If he had turned around, he would have seen Tessa still standing by her desk, her hands shaking as she stared at the financial reports. Reports that contained the first pieces of evidence she needed to prove Gabriel's personal involvement in her father's death. Reports that she should have felt triumphant to possess. Instead, all she could think about was the concern in Gabriel's voice when he told her to go home, and the way her heart had raced when he stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. This wasn't supposed to matter. Gabriel Ellsworth was supposed to be her enemy, not someone whose concern made her pulse quicken or who trusted her with his most sensitive business matters. But as Tessa finally gathered her things and headed for the elevator, she couldn't deny the truth that terrified her more than discovery. She was beginning to care about the man she had come to destroy. The confrontation came on a rainy Tuesday evening when Gabriel discovered Tessa working past midnight, completely reorganizing his client filing system without permission. "What exactly did you think you were doing?" Gabriel's voice was dangerously quiet as he stood in the doorway, holding a file that should have contained Morrison account details, but instead held environmental impact reports. Tessa looked up from her computer, her chin lifting with familiar defiance despite the late hour and her obvious exhaustion. "I was improving an inefficient system that was costing you hours every week." Gabriel stepped into the office, his presence filling the space between them with barely controlled frustration. "I didn't ask for improvements. I asked you to prepare tomorrow's presentations, which are finished and organized by priority level instead of arbitrary dates," Tessa replied, rising from her chair to face him directly. "Gabriel, your system was—" "My system was mine to change," Gabriel interrupted, moving closer until he could see the details in her dark eyes. "You don't get to remake my entire office because you think you know better." The challenge in her voice made something hot and dangerous unfurl in Gabriel's chest. "Even when those changes would save you 30 hours a month? Even then?" Gabriel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as he stepped closer, drawn by the way she refused to back down despite the obvious tension radiating from him. "What I value is respect for boundaries." "Boundaries," Tessa repeated, and Gabriel caught something in her tone that made him study her face more carefully. Yes, I suppose you would be concerned about those. For a moment, standing there in the empty office with city lights glittering beyond the windows, something electric passed between them that had nothing to do with filing systems or professional hierarchies. Miss White, Gabriel said slowly, his voice rough with an awareness he couldn't deny. Sometimes I get the feeling you're not telling me something important. Tessa's professional mask slipped, and Gabriel caught a glimpse of something raw and vulnerable before she stepped back, putting his desk between them. Everyone has secrets, Mr. Ellsworth. Gabriel found himself moving around the desk, closing the distance she had tried to create. Do they? And what secrets might you have? Gabriel. Tessa's voice was barely steady as she said his name. This isn't appropriate. Since when do you care about appropriate? Gabriel challenged, close enough now to catch the subtle scent of her perfume. Have dinner with me. Tessa's eyes widened. I can't. Why not? Because, Tessa said, her voice breaking slightly, there are things about me you don't know, things that would change everything between us. Gabriel reached out to touch her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. Try me. For a moment, Gabriel thought she might tell him. Then she was stepping away, gathering her things with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Good night, Gabriel. As Tessa left the office, Gabriel remained standing by her desk, knowing that whatever was happening between them had moved far beyond professional boundaries and into territory that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. What Gabriel didn't know was that Tessa had immediately called her sister Cynthia after leaving his office, her hands shaking as she held the phone. I can't do this, Tessa whispered into the phone. I'm supposed to hate him, Cyn. He killed our father. Tessa, Cynthia's voice was gentle but firm over the phone. You haven't forgotten what he did. You're just seeing him as a human instead of a monster. That doesn't change what happened to Daddy. But he's not a monster, Tessa said, tears streaming down her face. He's complicated and brilliant, and he worries about his employees working too late. He made a terrible mistake when he was young, but he's not evil. Good people can do terrible things, honey. That doesn't absolve them of consequences. Tessa stared out her window at the same mountains Gabriel had been admiring. I think I'm falling in love with him. The words hung in the air like an admission of treason. Oh, Tessa, Cynthia sighed. What are you going to do? I don't know, Tessa admitted. I honestly don't know. The blizzard struck at 3 a.m., transforming the Vermont mountains into a white wilderness that made travel impossible. Gabriel woke to the sound of wind howling against his windows and snow pelting the glass like frozen bullets. By morning, the lodge was completely cut off from the outside world, with power flickering intermittently and the heating systems struggling against the brutal cold. The planned morning sessions were canceled as staff worked to maintain basic services. Gabriel found himself in the main lodge area, which had become an impromptu gathering space where guests clustered around the massive stone fireplace, the only reliable source of warmth in the building. Tessa appeared at his elbow with a steaming cup of coffee, somehow managing to look composed despite the chaos around them. The power's been out for 2 hours, she reported quietly. The staff expects it to be restored by evening, but the storm isn't supposed to clear until tomorrow afternoon. Gabriel accepted the coffee gratefully, noting that Tessa had somehow procured it despite the kitchen being closed. How did you manage this? I helped the kitchen staff move supplies to the areas with working generators, Tessa replied. They were appreciative. Of course she had. Gabriel was beginning to understand that Tessa approached every situation, professional or personal, with the same strategic thinking that made her invaluable as an assistant. She identified needs and found solutions, often before others even recognized there was a problem. The lodge manager wants to move everyone to the main building, Tessa continued. The guest rooms are losing heat faster than the common areas. Gabriel looked around at the crowded space, where business executives were trying to maintain dignity while wrapped in lodge blankets and competing for proximity to the fireplace. The thought of spending the next 24 hours making small talk with colleagues while pretending the cold wasn't slowly seeping into his bones held no appeal. What about the conference room on the second floor? Gabriel asked. It has its own fireplace. I checked. The flue was damaged in the storm, so it's not safe to use. Gabriel was quiet for a moment, considering options. Then he remembered something from the lodge tour they had been given upon arrival. The library, Gabriel said. It's smaller, isolated from the main building, but it has a stone fireplace and should retain heat better than these open spaces. Tessa looked uncertain. The manager said the outlying buildings might lose power completely. But they'd be warmer than this, Gabriel pointed out, gesturing to where Harrison Webb was arguing with the lodge staff about the temperature, while Linda stood nearby, looking miserable in her designer clothes that were completely inappropriate for a power outage in a snowstorm. Tessa seemed to be weighing the options, and Gabriel realized she was considering the propriety of spending an extended period alone with him in an isolated building. The realization sent unexpected heat through his chest. It would be more comfortable, Tessa admitted. Then it settled. Gather whatever supplies we'll need for the day. 20 minutes later, they were making their way through the snow to the library, a smaller timber building connected to the main lodge by a covered walkway that provided minimal protection from the driving wind. Gabriel carried a bag of supplies that Tessa had somehow assembled: bottled water, non-perishable food, extra blankets, and battery-powered lanterns. The library was exactly as Gabriel remembered from the tour. Intimate and warmly appointed, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable leather chairs, and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. More importantly, it was significantly warmer than the main lodge. Gabriel immediately set about building a fire while Tessa organized their supplies with military efficiency. Within an hour, they had created a comfortable space with blankets spread on the floor near the fireplace and their food and water arranged within easy reach. This is much better, Gabriel said, settling onto the blankets and watching the flames dance in the fireplace. The orange light cast warm shadows across the room, creating an intimacy that felt both dangerous and irresistible. Tessa sat across from him, close enough that he could see the firelight reflected in her amber eyes. Without the usual backdrop of corporate efficiency and professional obligations, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Her dark hair fell loosely around her shoulders, and she had changed into jeans and a soft sweater that made Gabriel want to reach out and touch the fabric. Much warmer, anyway, Tessa agreed, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. Though I suspect the other guests think we've abandoned ship. Let them think what they want, Gabriel said, surprised by how little he cared about the opinions of his colleagues. We're not responsible for entertaining them. They spent the morning talking about safe topics: books from the library shelves, travel experiences, favorite restaurants in the city. But as the hours passed and the storm continued to rage outside, their conversation became more personal, more revealing. Tell me about your family, Gabriel said during a lull in conversation. Tessa's entire body tensed, and Gabriel immediately regretted the question. But after a moment, she answered quietly. It's just my sister and me now. Our parents died when I was in college. I'm sorry, Gabriel said, and meant it. That must have been devastating. It was. Tessa's voice was carefully controlled, but Gabriel caught the pain underneath. My father he was everything to me. Losing him changed everything about how I saw the world. Gabriel noticed she hadn't mentioned how her parents died, and something in her tone suggested the circumstances had been traumatic. He wanted to ask more questions, but the closed expression on Tessa's face warned him away from the topic. What about you? Tessa asked, clearly wanting to shift the focus. Your mother seems very involved in the company. She built it, Gabriel said with obvious pride. After my father died, everyone expected her to sell. Instead, she worked 18-hour days and turned a regional construction company into a national corporation. And then you took over when you were 28. Gabriel's expression darkened slightly. The board thought I was too young, too inexperienced. They weren't entirely wrong. What do you mean? Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. I made decisions in those early years that I wish I could take back. Choices that seemed logical at the time, but had consequences I didn't anticipate. Tessa's breathing had become shallow, and her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. What kind of consequences? People got hurt, Gabriel said simply. Good people who trusted me to make the right decisions, and I failed them. The admission hung between them like a confession, and Gabriel was surprised by how much he wanted to tell Tessa everything, about the safety shortcuts he had approved, about the men who had died because of his inexperience, about the responsibility that had reshaped his entire approach to leadership. Gabriel, Tessa said softly, everyone makes mistakes when they're learning. Not everyone's mistakes cost lives. The words slipped out before Gabriel could stop them, and he immediately regretted the revelation. But when he looked at Tessa, he saw not judgment in her eyes, but understanding. You can't carry that guilt forever, Tessa said, her voice gentle. At some point, you have to forgive yourself. Gabriel looked at her sharply. How can you say that? You don't even know what I did. I know you, Tessa replied, and the certainty in her voice surprised them both. I've worked with you for weeks, Gabriel. I've seen how you treat people, how much you care about doing the right thing now. Whatever happened in the past, you've learned from it. Gabriel felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight knot of guilt he had carried for 8 years. No one had ever told him that his past mistakes didn't define him completely. No one had ever looked at him with such understanding. Tessa, Gabriel said quietly, there are things about my past that you don't know. Things that might change how you see me. And there are things about my past that you don't know, Tessa replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Things that might change how you see me. They were leaning closer to each other now, drawn by the intimacy of confessions and the warm glow of the firelight. Gabriel could see the pulse fluttering at the base of Tessa's throat, could smell the subtle scent of her perfume mixed with the wood smoke from the fire. What if we're both keeping secrets? Gabriel asked, his voice rough with emotion. Then maybe, Tessa said, her eyes fixed on his, we understand each other better than we thought. The space between them seemed to disappear as Gabriel reached out to touch her face, his fingers tracing the line of her cheek with reverent gentleness. Tessa's eyes fluttered closed at the contact, and Gabriel heard her breath catch. Tessa, Gabriel whispered, I can't stop thinking about you. Gabriel. Tessa's voice was torn between longing and something that sounded like anguish. This is dangerous. I know, Gabriel admitted, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. I don't care. When Tessa's eyes opened again, Gabriel saw his own desire reflected there, along with a vulnerability that made his chest ache. She was fighting this attraction as hard as he was, but the battle was clearly being lost. What are we doing? Tessa asked, her voice barely audible. I don't know. Gabriel admitted, but I know I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is professional. The admission broke the last of Tessa's resistance. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as Gabriel's hand curved around the back of her neck, drawing her closer. When their lips met, it was with the desperate intensity of two people who had been fighting their attraction for weeks. Gabriel had kissed many women, but nothing had prepared him for the way Tessa responded to him. As if she were drowning and he was air. As if she had been waiting her entire life for this moment. Tessa's hands fisted in Gabriel's shirt, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened. She tasted like coffee, and something uniquely her own, and Gabriel thought he could spend the rest of his life learning the texture of her lips, the way she sighed when he touched her. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads resting against each other as they struggled to process what had just happened. Gabriel, Tessa whispered, her voice shaky, I should tell you. Don't, Gabriel interrupted, his hands framing her face. Whatever you're going to say, whatever reasons you have for why this is wrong, just don't. Not tonight. Tessa searched his eyes, and Gabriel saw the moment she made her decision. Instead of pulling away, she kissed him again, softer this time but no less intense. As the storm raged outside and the fire crackled beside them, Gabriel and Tessa crossed the line from professional colleagues to something infinitely more complicated and dangerous. Gabriel pulled Tessa closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to hold her in his arms. They talked through the afternoon as they lay entwined on the blankets, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Gabriel found himself revealing things he had never told anyone, his insecurities about taking over the company so young, his struggles with the weight of responsibility, his longing for someone who could see past his wealth and reputation to the man underneath. Tessa listened with an intensity that made Gabriel feel truly heard for the first time in years. She asked thoughtful questions, offered insights that surprised him with their depth, and shared carefully selected details about her own life that made Gabriel want to know everything about her. As evening approached and the power remained out, they found themselves wrapped in each other's arms, watching the fire burn lower while snow continued to pile against the windows. "We should probably head back to the main lodge," Tessa said without making any move to leave Gabriel's embrace. "Probably," Gabriel agreed, his arms tightening around her. In a few minutes. Those few minutes stretched into an hour, then two, as neither of them wanted to break the spell of intimacy that had settled over them. Gabriel had never felt so content, so completely at peace, as he did holding Tessa while she dozed against his chest. When she finally stirred, looking up at him with sleepy eyes, Gabriel knew that everything had changed between them. Whatever professional boundaries had existed before were gone, replaced by something infinitely more complex and dangerous. "Gabriel," Tessa said softly, "what happens tomorrow?" Gabriel considered the question seriously. Tomorrow, they would return to the office, to the roles of CEO and assistant, to the complicated dynamics of workplace hierarchy and professional expectations. "I don't know," Gabriel admitted, "but I know I don't want to pretend this didn't happen." Tessa was quiet for a long moment, and Gabriel caught something troubled in her expression. "What if everything changes?" she asked. "What if you find out things about me that make you regret this?" Gabriel tightened his arms around her, struck by the vulnerability in her voice. "Tessa, whatever secrets you think you're keeping, whatever you're afraid of, I want you to know something. This," he gestured between them, "this feels more real than anything I've experienced in years. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I know I want to find out with you." Tessa's eyes filled with tears, and Gabriel was alarmed by the depth of emotion he saw there. "Gabriel," she whispered, "I hope you remember that you said that." Before Gabriel could ask what she meant, Tessa was kissing him again, with a desperation that felt almost like goodbye. Gabriel pushed away the unease her words had created, and lost himself in the feel of her in his arms, in the promise of whatever was building between them. What Gabriel didn't know was that Tessa was memorizing every detail of this moment, the way his hands felt in her hair, the sound of his quiet laughter, the warmth of his body against hers, because she was terrified it might be the last time he would ever hold her with such tenderness. Tomorrow, they would return to the real world, where Tessa's investigation was nearing completion and the evidence against Gabriel was mounting. Tomorrow, she would have to choose between the justice her father deserved and the love she had never expected to find. But tonight, wrapped in Gabriel's arms while the storm raged outside, Tessa allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a different ending. An ending where love conquered truth, where forgiveness was possible, where the daughter of Marcus White could find happiness in the arms of the man who had destroyed her family. Even if she knew deep in her heart that such endings only existed in fairy tales. The morning after the storm brought brilliant sunshine and the awkward reality of returning to their professional roles. Gabriel and Tessa rode back to the city in careful silence, both hyper-aware of how everything had changed while struggling to maintain the appearance that nothing had. In the office, their dynamic became a delicate dance of stolen glances and carefully maintained boundaries. Gabriel found excuses to call Tessa into his office for consultations that lasted longer than necessary. Tessa discovered reasons to work late when the rest of the staff had gone home, creating opportunities for quiet conversations that skirted the edge of intimacy without crossing into inappropriate territory. The tension was almost unbearable. "Have dinner with me tonight," Gabriel said, abandoning any pretense of professional distance. Tessa's shoulders tensed. "Gabriel, we discussed this. The complications?" "I know what we discussed," Gabriel interrupted, rising from his chair and moving toward her. "But I also know that pretending nothing happened between us isn't working for either of us." Tessa turned to face him, and Gabriel saw his own frustration reflected in her amber eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop pretending that what happened at the lodge was a mistake," Gabriel said, his voice low and intense. "I'm suggesting we explore whatever this is between us like adults. And if it doesn't work out, if things become complicated?" Gabriel studied her face, noting the way she held herself as if she were preparing for disappointment. "Then we deal with the complications. But Tessa, I've been thinking about you every minute since we came back. I can't concentrate on work, I can't sleep, and I sure as hell can't pretend that I don't want to be with you." For a moment, Tessa's professional mask slipped, and Gabriel saw longing and something that looked like pain flicker across her features. "Gabriel," she said softly, "there are things you don't understand about my situation, things that make this more complicated than you realize. Then explain them to me." Tessa was quiet for a long moment, and Gabriel could see her internal struggle. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. "Not here," she said. "If we're going to do this, we need to be away from the office." Gabriel felt a surge of triumph mixed with relief. "My apartment? 8 o'clock." As Tessa nodded and left his office, Gabriel couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial about her reluctance. But his desire to be with her overrode his caution, and he spent the rest of the day anticipating the evening with an intensity that surprised him. What Gabriel didn't know was that Tessa spent her lunch hour in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office, talking to Detective Ray Morrison. Ray was exactly what casting directors would order for the role of dedicated investigator. Tall, dark-haired, with intelligent eyes, and the kind of steady presence that made people want to confess their secrets. He had been tracking Tessa's investigation for weeks, and his interest in her was becoming increasingly personal. "You're getting in too deep," Ray said without preamble as Tessa sat across from him at a corner table. "I can see it in your face." "I'm maintaining my cover," Tessa replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Are you?" Ray leaned forward, his dark eyes searching her face. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're falling for your target." Tessa's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "My personal feelings don't affect my mission." "Don't they?" Ray's voice was gentle but persistent. "Tessa, I've been watching Gabriel Ellsworth for months. He's not a monster. He's a man who made a terrible mistake when he was young and inexperienced. That doesn't absolve him of responsibility, but it doesn't make him irredeemable either." "He killed my father," Tessa said, but the words lacked the fire they had carried a month ago. "He approved a decision that resulted in your father's death," Ray corrected. "There's a difference, and you know it." Tessa stared out the window at the bustling street, watching people go about their ordinary lives while hers fell apart in slow motion. "What are you saying?" she asked finally. "I'm saying you have options," Ray replied. "The federal investigation is going to expose everything anyway. You don't have to be the one to destroy him. And my father, what about justice for him?" Ray was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "Sometimes justice and revenge are 2 different things, and sometimes the cost of revenge is higher than we're prepared to pay." Tessa looked down at Ray's hand covering hers and felt nothing. No spark, no quickening of her pulse, none of the electric awareness that Gabriel's slightest touch produced. Ray was kind, honest, and understood her mission. He was everything Gabriel wasn't, and everything Gabriel was not. "Ray," Tessa said gently, pulling her hand away, "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this is something I have to see through. Even if it destroys you?" Tessa met his eyes steadily. "Even then." As she walked back to the office, Tessa tried to ignore the voice in her head that whispered, Ray was right. That she was in too deep, that her feelings for Gabriel were compromising everything she had worked for, that she was betraying her father's memory by falling in love with the man responsible for his death. But as she saw Gabriel waiting for her in the lobby of his apartment building that evening, looking devastatingly handsome in dark jeans and a navy sweater, Tessa realized that some betrayals were beyond her control. Gabriel's apartment was exactly what she had expected. Elegant, expensive, and surprisingly warm. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city skyline, while comfortable furniture and carefully chosen art created an atmosphere of sophisticated comfort. "This is beautiful," Tessa said, accepting the glass of wine Gabriel offered her. "Thank you." Gabriel joined her by the windows, and they stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the city. "Tessa, before we go any further, I want you to know that I've never been involved with an employee before. I don't take workplace relationships lightly. And yet here we are." Gabriel turned to study her profile. "And yet here we are. Which tells me that whatever this is between us, it's significant enough to risk the complications." Tessa sipped her wine, using the moment to gather her courage. "Gabriel, what happened at the lodge? It can't happen again." Gabriel's face fell. "I see." "You don't see," Tessa said quickly, turning to face him. "You don't understand. I'm not saying I don't want it to happen again. I'm saying it can't. There are things about my situation that make it impossible." "What kind of things?" Tessa set down her wine glass and moved away from him, needing space to think clearly. "I told you my parents died when I was in college." "Yes. I didn't tell you how." Tessa's voice was carefully controlled. "My father died in an industrial accident, a construction site where safety protocols were ignored to save money and meet deadlines." Gabriel went very still. "Tessa, the company responsible buried the incident, paid off inspectors, and made sure no one was held accountable." Tessa's voice was gaining strength. 3 men died and no one paid the price." Gabriel's face had gone pale. "What are you saying?" Tessa met his eyes directly. "I'm saying that I know what it's like to lose someone, because corporate executives prioritize profits over lives. I know what it feels like to watch the people responsible walk away without consequences." "Tessa," Gabriel's voice was rough with emotion, "I am so sorry. I had no idea you had experienced something like that." The genuine compassion in his voice nearly broke Tessa's resolve. This would have been the perfect moment to tell him the truth, to reveal that his company, his personal decision, had been responsible for her father's death. But looking at Gabriel's face, seeing the pain he felt for her loss, Tessa couldn't bring herself to deliver the blow that would destroy everything between them. "I know you are," Tessa said softly, "and that's what makes this so complicated." Gabriel moved toward her, his hands reaching for her face with infinite gentleness. "Tessa, whatever happened to your father, whatever company was responsible, that doesn't have to affect what's between us. Doesn't it?" Tessa's eyes filled with tears. "How can I be with someone whose world I don't trust? How can I separate the man from the system he represents?" Gabriel's hand stilled on her face. "What if I told you that I understand your anger? What if I told you that I've made mistakes in business that I would give anything to undo?" "What kind of mistakes?" Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. "Early in my career, I approved decisions that resulted in people getting hurt. Good people who trusted me to protect their interests, and I failed them." Tessa's breath caught. He was talking about her father, about Marcus White and the 2 other men who had died, though he didn't know it. "Gabriel," Tessa whispered, "what would you do if you could face the families of those people? If you could make amends?" "I would do whatever it took," Gabriel said without hesitation. "I would accept responsibility, make whatever reparations were possible, and spend the rest of my life ensuring it never happened again." The sincerity in his voice, the obvious pain he carried, made Tessa's heart ache. This wasn't the callous corporate executive she had expected to find. This was a man who genuinely regretted his mistakes and would pay any price to make amends. "What if one of those families was standing in front of you right now?" Tessa asked, her voice barely audible. "What would you say?" Gabriel's hands trembled slightly as he cupped her face. "I would tell them that their loss haunts me every day, that I know nothing I say or do can bring back the people they loved, but that I would spend the rest of my life trying to honor their memory by being better." Tessa closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, she made a choice that went against everything she had planned, everything she had promised her father's memory. Instead of revealing the truth, she kissed Gabriel with all the desperation and longing that had been building for weeks. She kissed him like a woman saying goodbye, because in many ways, she was. Gabriel responded with equal intensity, pulling her closer as if he could somehow merge their souls through physical connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Tessa, Gabriel whispered against her lips. Whatever's troubling you, we can work through it together. Can we? Tessa's voice was filled with heartbreak. What if I told you that being with you feels like a betrayal of everything I believe in? Then I would tell you that sometimes love requires us to question what we believe, Gabriel replied, his voice fierce with conviction. Sometimes love forces us to choose between the past and the future. Gabriel's words hit Tessa like a physical blow, because they articulated exactly the choice she was facing. The past, her father's death, her family's pain, her quest for justice, or the future, a love she had never expected to find with a man who might be capable of redemption. Gabriel, Tessa said, her voice breaking, I'm scared. Of what? Of choosing wrong, of betraying the people I love, of finding out that what we have isn't strong enough to survive the truth. Gabriel pulled her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that made Tessa want to weep. Then don't choose tonight, Gabriel said softly. Just be here with me. Let everything else wait until tomorrow. And so Tessa did. She let Gabriel hold her, while she cried for her father, for the innocence she had lost, for the impossible situation that loving Gabriel had created. She let herself believe, for one night, that love could conquer truth, that forgiveness was possible, that the daughter of Marcus White could find happiness in the arms of Gabriel Ellsworth. As they moved to the couch and Gabriel held her while she dozed against his chest, Tessa memorized every detail. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the way his fingers moved through her hair, the soft words of comfort he whispered when he thought she was asleep. Tomorrow she would have to return to her mission. Tomorrow she would have to choose between love and justice. But tonight she allowed herself to love the man she had come to destroy, even knowing it would likely destroy them both in the end. The next few weeks established a pattern that felt both natural and dangerously precarious. Gabriel and Tessa maintained scrupulous professionalism during office hours, but their evenings belonged to each other. They shared dinners at quiet restaurants where they could talk without interruption, took long walks through the city where their fingers intertwined naturally, and spent hours in Gabriel's apartment learning each other's histories, dreams, and fears. Gabriel found himself looking forward to these moments with an intensity that surprised him. Tessa was unlike any woman he had ever known, brilliant enough to challenge his thinking, compassionate enough to see past his public facade, and strong enough to stand her ground when they disagreed. She made him want to be better than he was, to live up to the man she saw when she looked at him. What Gabriel didn't realize was that every moment of happiness made Tessa's deception more excruciating. The evidence against Gabriel's company continued to mount in her carefully hidden files, while her feelings for him deepened with each passing day. She was living a double life that was slowly tearing her apart. The crisis came on a Tuesday morning when Dorothy Ellsworth collapsed during a board presentation. Gabriel had been outlining the company's expansion into renewable energy when his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Ellsworth, there's an emergency. Your mother." Gabriel was moving before she finished the sentence, Tessa close behind him, as they rushed to the executive conference room where Dorothy had been meeting with potential investors. They found her conscious but pale, sitting in a chair while paramedics checked her vital signs. "I'm fine," Dorothy insisted as Gabriel knelt beside her chair, but her voice was weak and her hands were shaking. "Just a dizzy spell, too much coffee, not enough breakfast." Gabriel's face was tight with worry as he watched the paramedics work. "Mom, you're going to the hospital, no arguments." "Gabriel, the investors can reschedule," Gabriel said firmly. "Tessa, cancel everything for the rest of the day. I'm going with her to the hospital." Tessa nodded, already pulling out her phone to handle the logistics. But as the paramedics prepared to transport Dorothy, the older woman caught Tessa's hand. "Come with us, dear," Dorothy said, her voice surprisingly strong. "Gabriel will need someone there." The request surprised everyone, including Gabriel, but Tessa found herself riding in the ambulance while Gabriel held his mother's hand and tried to hide his fear. At the hospital, they waited for what felt like hours while doctors ran tests. Gabriel paced the private waiting room like a caged animal, his usual composed control completely shattered. She's all I have left, Gabriel said suddenly, stopping his pacing to stare out the window at the city below. After my father died, she gave up everything to save the company. She worked herself half to death to prove that a woman could run a construction empire. I can't lose her. Tessa's heart ached at the raw vulnerability in Gabriel's voice. Gabriel, she's going to be okay. Dorothy is the strongest woman I've ever met. Gabriel turned to look at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. I don't know what I would do without you here. Having you with me, it makes this bearable. Before Tessa could respond, Dr. Hamilton emerged from the examination rooms, his expression serious but not alarming. She's stable, he said immediately, addressing Gabriel's obvious anxiety. But I'm concerned about her blood pressure and stress levels. Has she been under unusual pressure recently? Gabriel's jaw tightened. She's always under pressure. Running a major corporation isn't exactly restful. Mr. Ellsworth, your mother needs to reduce her stress significantly. Her blood pressure is dangerously high, and at her age, another episode like this could be much more serious. After the doctor left them to process the information, Gabriel slumped into a chair, his hands covering his face. She won't step back, Gabriel said, his voice muffled. I've been trying to get her to retire for years, but the company is her life. Tessa sat beside him, her hand covering his. Maybe this will convince her to listen. Gabriel looked up at her, and Tessa was struck by how young he looked in that moment. Not the powerful CEO, but a son terrified of losing his mother. Tessa, Gabriel said quietly, there are things about the company's history that my mother doesn't know, decisions I made in those early years that would break her heart if she found out. Tessa's breath caught. What kind of decisions? Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. People died because of choices I made. Good people who trusted the company to protect them, and I failed them because I was more concerned with proving myself than with doing the right thing. Gabriel, Tessa's voice was barely a whisper, you can't carry that guilt forever. Can't I? Gabriel's laugh was bitter. 3 men died, Tessa. They had families, people who loved them, and they died because I was too arrogant and inexperienced to listen to the people who tried to warn me about safety concerns. Tessa felt like she couldn't breathe. Gabriel was talking about her father, about Marcus White, and the 2 other men who had died in the scaffolding collapse. But the guilt and remorse in his voice were so genuine, so devastating, that she couldn't reconcile this man with the callous executive she had imagined. Have you ever tried to contact their families? Tessa asked, her voice trembling. Gabriel's hands clenched into fists. The legal department advised against it, said it would open the company to liability. But not a day goes by that I don't think about those families. Wonder how they're doing. Wish I could somehow make amends. What would you say to them if you could? Gabriel looked at her with haunted eyes. I would tell them that their loved ones deserved better, that I was responsible for the decisions that cost them their lives, and that I would spend the rest of my life trying to honor their memory by ensuring nothing like that ever happens again. Tessa felt tears streaming down her face, and Gabriel immediately pulled her into his arms, misunderstanding the source of her emotion. I'm sorry, Gabriel said softly. I shouldn't have told you all of this. I know it's difficult to hear, especially given what happened to your father. Gabriel, Tessa whispered against his chest, what if I told you that forgiveness was possible? That those families might understand that you were young and inexperienced, that you never intended for anyone to get hurt? Gabriel's arms tightened around her. I would say that you have more faith in human nature than I do. Some mistakes are unforgivable. And some people are capable of more grace than we give them credit for. They held each other in the hospital waiting room, both crying for different reasons. Gabriel for the guilt he had carried for 8 years, and Tessa for the impossible choice that was becoming clearer with each moment. When Dorothy was finally discharged with strict instructions for rest and stress reduction, Gabriel insisted on taking her to his apartment where he could monitor her recovery. This decision created an unexpected opportunity for Tessa to see a different side of both Gabriel and his mother. Dorothy Ellsworth was exactly as formidable as her reputation suggested. But Tessa quickly discovered that beneath the steel exterior was a woman who loved her son with fierce devotion and worried about his happiness more than her own health. "He's different with you," Dorothy said to Tessa as they sat in Gabriel's kitchen while he took business calls in his study. "More relaxed, more like the boy he was before he took on so much responsibility." Tessa looked up from the soup she was warming for Dorothy's lunch. "He's a good man." "Yes, he is." Dorothy agreed, studying Tessa with sharp eyes. "But he's also a man who carries too much guilt for mistakes he made when he was barely more than a child himself." Tessa's hands stilled on the soup ladle. "What do you mean?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Gabriel thinks I don't know about the construction accident that happened in his first year as CEO. He thinks he protected me from that knowledge." Tessa's heart began to race. "You know? I'm not a foolish old woman, dear. I know every significant event in my company's history. I know about the safety shortcuts he approved, and I know about the men who died because of those decisions." "Then why haven't you talked to him about it?" Dorothy's expression was infinitely sad. "Because my son is already drowning in guilt. Because he's spent 8 years trying to atone for a mistake he made when he was 28 years old and terrified of failing. Because sometimes the kindest thing a mother can do is let her child carry their burden without making it heavier." Tessa felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "Mrs. Ellsworth, do you think Gabriel deserves forgiveness for what happened?" Dorothy studied Tessa's face carefully. "I think Gabriel deserves the chance to be judged for the man he's become, not just the mistakes he made as a frightened young man. I think those families deserved better than what happened to them, but I also think that destroying Gabriel now won't bring their loved ones back." The conversation was interrupted by Gabriel's return to the kitchen, but Dorothy's words echoed in Tessa's mind long after she left his apartment that evening. That night, Tessa called her sister Cynthia, desperate for guidance. "I can't do it, Cyn," Tessa said, her voice breaking. "I can't destroy him." "Tessa," Cynthia's voice was gentle but concerned. "What's happened? You sound like you're falling apart." "I am falling apart," Tessa admitted. "Gabriel's not the monster I expected to find. He's a good man who made a terrible mistake when he was young and scared. He carries the guilt every day. He told me today that he thinks about Daddy and the other men constantly, that he wishes he could make amends to their families." Cynthia was quiet for a long moment. "Tessa, honey, you're in love with him." "Yes," Tessa whispered, the admission tearing from her throat. "God help me. I'm in love with the man who killed our father, and I don't know how to live with that." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Tessa said, wiping tears from her face. "The federal investigation is closing in. Detective Morrison says they'll have enough evidence to prosecute within the month. If I don't act soon, Gabriel will be blindsided by charges he doesn't see coming." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Cynthia said carefully. "Maybe justice doesn't have to come from you." "But Daddy would want you to be happy," Cynthia interrupted firmly. "He loved you more than anything, Tessa. He wouldn't want you to destroy your own life for revenge." After ending the call, Tessa sat in her empty apartment, staring at the files spread across her coffee table. 8 months of meticulous investigation that proved Gabriel's personal culpability in her father's death. Files that could destroy the man she loved and everything he had built. Files that she was no longer sure she could use. The next morning brought a complication Tessa hadn't anticipated. She was reviewing Gabriel's schedule when Detective Ray Morrison appeared at her desk, his presence immediately drawing curious glances from other staff members. "Miss White, I'm Detective Morrison," Ray said formally, though his eyes carried a personal warmth that made Tessa's stomach clench with anxiety. "I wonder if we could speak privately about a security matter." Tessa's professional mask slipped into place automatically. "Of course. There's a conference room down the hall." As they walked to the small conference room, Tessa's mind raced through possibilities. Ray had been careful never to contact her at the office before. Something significant must have happened. "The federal investigation is accelerating," Ray said without preamble once they were alone. They've uncovered additional evidence about safety violations at multiple Ellsworth construction sites. Gabriel Ellsworth is going to be formally charged within 2 weeks. Tessa felt the blood drain from her face. 2 weeks? Maybe less. Ray studied her carefully. Tessa, you need to extract yourself from this situation now. When the charges come down, anyone close to Gabriel is going to be scrutinized. Your position here will become untenable. What kind of charges? Criminal negligence resulting in death, corporate fraud, potentially more if they can prove a pattern of willful safety violations. Ray's voice was professional, but his eyes were concerned. Tessa, this is going to destroy him, completely. Tessa sank into a chair, her hands shaking. Ray, I need more time. Time for what? To figure out how to minimize the damage. Gabriel's mother has a heart condition. This kind of stress could kill her. And Gabriel, he's already carrying so much guilt if he's blindsided by federal charges. Tessa, Ray's voice was sharp. You're not thinking clearly. Gabriel Ellsworth isn't your responsibility. Your father is. My father is dead, Tessa said quietly. Nothing I do will bring him back. Ray moved to sit across from her, his expression intense. Then what about justice? What about ensuring this never happens to another family? Gabriel's already implementing new safety protocols across all company sites. He's spending millions on upgrades that go beyond federal requirements. He's learned from his mistakes. 8 years too late for your father. The words hit like a physical blow, and Tessa flinched. I know that. Don't you think I know that? But destroying Gabriel now won't bring my father back, and it won't prevent future accidents if Gabriel's the one person who's genuinely committed to making changes. Ray studied her face for a long moment. You're really in love with him. Yes. And you think that love justifies abandoning your mission? Tessa met his eyes steadily. I think love sometimes requires us to choose between justice and mercy. And I think my father would understand the choice I'm making. Ray was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table to cover her hand with his. Tessa, I care about you, more than I probably should given our professional relationship. If you want to walk away from this, I'll support that decision, but you need to understand the consequences. What consequences? The federal investigation will proceed with or without your evidence. Gabriel will still face charges, but without your inside information, he won't have any warning. He won't have the chance to prepare his mother, protect his employees, or control the narrative. Tessa realized what Ray was offering, a way to preserve her relationship with Gabriel while still ensuring justice was served. But it felt like cowardice, like abandoning her father's memory without even giving Gabriel the chance to make things right. There's a third option, Tessa said slowly. Which is? I tell Gabriel the truth. I give him the evidence I've gathered and let him decide how to handle it. Maybe he chooses to cooperate with the federal investigation. Maybe he finds a way to make amends to the families that satisfies both justice and mercy. Ray's expression was skeptical. And if he chooses to fight the charges? If he uses your evidence to escape consequences? Then I'll know I misjudged him, Tessa said simply. But I have to give him the chance to prove who he really is. As Ray left the office, Tessa remained in the conference room, staring out the window at the city beyond. In 2 weeks, Gabriel's world would explode unless she acted. She could run, preserve her relationship, but abandon her mission. She could stay silent and let Gabriel be blindsided by federal charges. Or she could tell him the truth and trust that the man she loved was capable of doing the right thing, even when it cost him everything. The decision felt impossible until she remembered Gabriel's words from the night before. I would spend the rest of my life trying to honor their memory by ensuring nothing like that ever happens again. Maybe it was time to give him that chance. That evening, Gabriel found Tessa in his office long after the rest of the staff had gone home. She was sitting at his desk, staring at a manila folder with an expression he couldn't read. You look like you're contemplating the end of the world, Gabriel said, settling into the chair across from his own desk. Tessa looked up at him, and Gabriel was alarmed by the pain in her amber eyes. Maybe I am. What's wrong? Tessa opened the folder and turned it toward him. Gabriel found himself looking at photographs, documents, and financial records that he recognized with a growing sense of dread. Tessa, Gabriel's voice was very quiet, What is this? Evidence, Tessa said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Evidence that you personally approved the safety shortcuts that resulted in the scaffolding collapse at the Riverside construction development 8 years ago. Gabriel felt the world tilt around him. How did you get this? I've been investigating you for 8 months, Tessa said simply. Ever since I started working here. Gabriel stared at the documents, then at Tessa's face, trying to process what she was telling him. You've been investigating me? My name is Tessa White, she said, her voice breaking. My father was Marcus White. He died in the scaffolding collapse that you authorized. The words hit Gabriel like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair, his face going pale as the implications crashed over him. Your father, Gabriel repeated slowly. Marcus White was your father. Yes. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence spread across his desk. When he finally looked up at Tessa, his expression was unreadable. How long have you known? Since before I applied for this job. I came here to destroy you, Gabriel. I came here to gather evidence that would ensure you faced consequences for what you did to my family. Gabriel nodded slowly, as if the information was settling into place. And now? Now I'm in love with you, Tessa said, her voice raw with emotion. And I don't know how to reconcile that with everything I believed about justice and revenge and what I owed my father's memory. Gabriel studied her face for a long moment. Tessa, he said quietly, what do you want me to do? The question surprised her. What do you mean? I mean, you have evidence that could destroy me. You have every right to use it. So what do you want me to do? Tessa looked at him in amazement. Even now, faced with the evidence of her deception and the threat of his destruction, Gabriel was giving her the choice. He wasn't trying to manipulate her or convince her to protect him. He was simply accepting responsibility and asking what she needed from him. I want you to tell me what kind of man you really are, Tessa said finally. I want you to prove that the person I fell in love with is real, not just an illusion. Gabriel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights, while he considered his response. When he turned back to Tessa, his expression was resolute. Your father's name was Marcus White. He was 43 years old, married to Alina White, and fathered to 2 daughters, you and Cynthia. He worked construction for 18 years and was known as one of the most safety-conscious foremen on any job site. Tessa held her breath. How do you know that? Because I've spent 8 years learning everything I could about the men who died because of my decision. Marcus White, David Chen, and Robert Martinez. I know their ages, their families, their work histories. I know that Marcus coached your little league team, and that David Chen was saving money to buy his parents a house, and that Robert Martinez had just gotten engaged. Gabriel moved back to the desk, his eyes never leaving Tessa's face. I know that Marcus White's daughters were both in college when he died, and that his wife had to sell their house to pay for the funerals and the medical bills for Marcus's final hospitalization. Tessa was crying now, overwhelmed by the realization that Gabriel had known her father's story all along. I tried to find ways to help the families without exposing the company to legal liability, Gabriel continued. Anonymous scholarships for the children, donations to charities in the victims' names, ensuring that other construction workers had better safety protections. But nothing I did could bring back 3 good men or heal the hearts of the people who loved them. Gabriel, Tessa whispered, why didn't you ever try to contact the families directly? Gabriel's expression was infinitely sad. Because I was a coward. Because I knew that facing the families would mean accepting full responsibility for what I had done, and I wasn't brave enough to do that. Gabriel sat back down, reaching across the desk to cover Tessa's hands with his. Tessa, I need you to know something. Everything between us, every conversation, every moment, every feeling, that was real. You didn't fall in love with an illusion. You fell in love with a man who has been carrying the weight of your father's death for 8 years, who thinks about Marcus White every time he makes a business decision, who has spent 8 years trying to become worthy of the forgiveness he doesn't expect to receive. Tessa looked into Gabriel's eyes and saw the truth of his words. What do we do now? Gabriel squeezed her hands gently. Now you tell me what you need from me. What would honor your father's memory? What would give you peace? Whatever it is, I'll do it. Tessa considered the question seriously. The federal investigation is going to expose everything anyway. Detective Morrison says you'll be charged within 2 weeks. Gabriel's jaw tightened. I see. But they'll blindside you. Your mother won't be prepared. Your employees will panic. The company's stock will crash and thousands of people will suffer. And you're offering me an alternative? Tessa nodded. I'm offering you the chance to control how this comes out, to protect the people you care about, and to make amends on your own terms instead of having justice imposed on you. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, then stood and walked to his safe. He returned with a thick folder that he placed on the desk beside Tessa's evidence. What's this? Tessa asked. 8 years of documentation, Gabriel said. Every safety improvement I've implemented, every family I've tried to help anonymously, every policy change designed to prevent another accident like the one that killed your father, and a letter I wrote to the families 5 years ago but never sent. Tessa opened the folder with trembling hands. The letter was addressed to the families of Marcus White, David Chen, and Robert Martinez, and began. I don't know if anything I say can express the depth of my remorse for the decisions that cost your loved ones their lives. I was 28 years old, inexperienced, and terrified of failing as the new CEO of my family's company. When my construction manager proposed cutting safety protocols to meet budget constraints and impress our board of directors, I approved those cuts without fully understanding the consequences. My inexperience and poor judgment directly resulted in the scaffolding collapse that killed 3 good men who deserved much better from the company they trusted to protect them. The letter went on for several pages, detailing Gabriel's specific culpability, his efforts to improve safety standards, and his commitment to ensuring such a tragedy never happened again. It was a complete confession, written with obvious sincerity and devastating self-awareness. Gabriel, Tessa said softly, why didn't you send this? Because my lawyers advised against it, because I was afraid of the legal consequences, because I was still, fundamentally, a coward. Tessa looked at the man sitting across from her, not the powerful CEO, but a person who had been carrying unbearable guilt for 8 years and was finally ready to face the consequences of his actions. Gabriel, she said, I forgive you. Gabriel's eyes filled with tears. Tessa, you don't have to. I forgive you, Tessa repeated firmly. Not because I love you, but because my father would want me to. Because you've learned from your mistakes and spent 8 years trying to honor his memory. Because forgiveness is sometimes the only way to heal. Gabriel reached across the desk and pulled Tessa into his arms, both of them crying for different reasons. Gabriel for the absolution he had never expected to receive, and Tessa for the release of 8 years of anger and grief. What happens now? Gabriel asked when they had both composed themselves. Tessa took a deep breath. Now we figure out how to make this right. Together. 2 weeks later, Tessa sat in her bathroom at 6 a.m., staring at the positive pregnancy test with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Her hands shook as she read the result for the 3rd time, as if the lines might somehow rearrange themselves into a different answer. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Gabriel's child, just as their carefully constructed plan to handle the federal investigation was about to be tested. Over the past 14 days, Gabriel had thrown himself into damage control with the intensity that had made him a successful CEO. He had retained the best criminal defense attorney in the city, begun preparing his mother for the possibility of federal charges, and started drafting a comprehensive plan to cooperate with investigators while protecting his employees and shareholders. Most importantly, he had finally sent the letter to the families of the 3 men who had died. Tessa had been with him when he sealed the envelopes, his hands trembling as he faced the moment he had avoided for 8 years. What if they don't want to hear from me? Gabriel had asked as they stood in his office, the letters ready for delivery. Then they'll tell you that, Tessa had replied. But at least they'll have the choice. Elena White, Tessa's mother, had called 3 days later. The conversation had been awkward, painful, and ultimately healing. Elena had listened as Gabriel took full responsibility for Marcus's death, offered financial compensation that he knew couldn't replace what was lost, and committed to testifying truthfully in any legal proceedings. "I can't say I forgive you," Alina had told Gabriel quietly. "Not yet. But I can see that you're trying to do the right thing now, and that matters." It was progress, but fragile progress that could be shattered by the news Tessa was now carrying. Pregnant. The timing couldn't have been worse. Gabriel was facing potential criminal charges that could result in prison time. The company was in crisis mode, with stock prices fluctuating wildly as rumors of federal investigation circulated. And now, Tessa was pregnant with the child of the man she had originally planned to destroy. Tessa's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Ray Morrison. "Federal task force meeting moved to today. They're finalizing charges. You need to prepare Gabriel." The federal investigation had been proceeding faster than expected. Despite Gabriel's cooperation and attempts to make amends, the prosecutors were determined to make an example of corporate executives who prioritized profits over safety. Gabriel's voluntary confession had actually expedited the process, providing investigators with the evidence they needed to build a solid case. Tessa dressed mechanically, her mind reeling from the pregnancy news and the text from Ray. She arrived at the office to find Gabriel already at his desk, reviewing legal documents with his attorney. "Good morning," Gabriel said, looking up as she entered. His smile faltered when he saw her expression. "Tessa, what's wrong? You look pale." "We need to talk," Tessa said, her voice carefully controlled. "Privately." Gabriel's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Chen, looked between them with professional curiosity. "I'll step out for a few minutes." Once they were alone, Gabriel moved to Tessa, his hands immediately reaching for her face. "What's happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Gabriel," Tessa said, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant." Gabriel went very still, his hands freezing against her cheeks. "What?" "I'm pregnant," Tessa repeated, the words feeling surreal as she spoke them. "I took 3 tests this morning. They were all positive." Gabriel stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that looked like wonder. "Pregnant," Gabriel said slowly, as if testing the word. "You're having my baby?" "Yes." Gabriel's hands moved to cup her face more gently, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize had started falling. "Tessa, that's incredible." "Is it?" Tessa's voice was strained. "Gabriel, you're about to be indicted on federal charges. You could go to prison. This is the worst possible timing for—" Gabriel silenced her with a kiss, soft and reverent and full of emotion she couldn't identify. "Tessa," Gabriel said against her lips, "this baby is the best thing that could happen to us. No matter what else is going on, no matter what legal troubles I'm facing, we created something beautiful together." "Gabriel, be realistic. If you go to prison, then I'll serve my time and come home to you and our child," Gabriel said firmly. "Tessa, I'm not going to pretend this isn't complicated, but I'm also not going to pretend that I'm not overjoyed that you're carrying my baby." Tessa felt fresh tears streaming down her face. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of raising a child alone. Of explaining to our baby why daddy isn't there. Of the media attention when this all comes out." Tessa's voice was getting stronger, fueled by genuine fear. "Gabriel, when the federal charges are announced, everything about our relationship will be scrutinized. The fact that I'm your assistant, the fact that I was investigating you, it's going to look like the most sordid kind of corporate scandal." Gabriel pulled her into his arms, holding her close while her fears spilled out. "Then we get ahead of it. We control the narrative." "How?" Gabriel was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through options. "We tell the truth. All of it. We admit that you came here to investigate me, that we fell in love despite the circumstances, that we're having a child together and committed to making our family work despite the legal challenges." "Gabriel, that sounds like a fairy tale. No one will believe it." "They'll believe it because it's true," Gabriel said simply, "and because we'll face it together honestly." Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah Chen's return, followed immediately by Gabriel's assistant announcing that Detective Morrison was in the lobby asking to see Gabriel. "This is it," Gabriel said quietly, his arms tightening around Tessa. "They're here to make the arrest." Tessa felt panic rising in her chest. "Gabriel, I can't." "Yes, you can," Gabriel said firmly, turning her to face him. Tessa, whatever happens today, remember that I love you. Remember that we're having a baby together, and that's the most important thing in the world. Everything else is just circumstances we have to navigate. Detective Morrison entered the office with two federal agents, their serious expressions confirming what everyone already knew. Gabriel Ellsworth, Detective Morrison said formally. You're under arrest for criminal negligence resulting in death, corporate fraud, and violation of federal workplace safety regulations. As Gabriel was read his rights, Tessa felt the world tilting around her. This was really happening. The man she loved, the father of her unborn child, was being arrested for crimes that she had helped expose. Gabriel's eyes met hers as the handcuffs were applied. Take care of yourself and our baby, he said quietly. I'll call you as soon as I can. As Gabriel was led away, Tessa sank into a chair, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. In the space of one morning, she had discovered she was pregnant and watched the father of her child arrested on federal charges. Sarah Chen sat across from her, her expression professional but kind. Miss White, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand something. Gabriel's arrest was expected. We've been preparing for this moment for weeks. What happens now? Now Gabriel is processed and arraigned. Bail will be set, probably quite high given the nature of the charges. He'll be home tonight, but the legal process is just beginning. Tessa nodded numbly. And the media? We'll have a field day, Sarah admitted. Gabriel's arrest will be front-page news by tomorrow. Your relationship with him will inevitably become part of the story. What should I do? Sarah studied Tessa's face carefully. That depends on what you want your role to be. You could distance yourself from Gabriel, protect your own reputation and your child's future. Or you could stand by him, face the scrutiny together, and help him navigate what's going to be a very difficult period. Tessa thought about the choice Sarah was offering. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to walk away, to protect herself and her unborn child from the media circus and legal complications that would follow Gabriel for years. But as Tessa thought about Gabriel's face when she told him about the pregnancy, the wonder and joy that had overshadowed his fear, she realized the choice had already been made. I'm not going anywhere, Tessa said firmly. Gabriel and I are having a child together. We're going to face whatever comes next as a family. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the office. Then let's talk about how to protect all three of you, Gabriel, you, and the baby, while we navigate this legal challenge. As Tessa spent the rest of the day planning strategy with Gabriel's legal team, she couldn't help but marvel at how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been consumed with revenge, focused solely on destroying the man who had killed her father. Now she was pregnant with that man's child and committed to standing by him as he faced the consequences of his actions. Love, Tessa reflected, was far more complicated than justice. But maybe, just maybe, it was also more powerful. That evening, Gabriel was released on $1 million bail, his passport surrendered, and his movements restricted while awaiting trial. Tessa was waiting for him when he emerged from the courthouse, ignoring the camera flashes and shouted questions from reporters. Gabriel pulled her into his arms right there on the courthouse steps, his relief at being released evident in the way he held her. How are you feeling? Gabriel asked as they made their way to his car through the crowd of media. Nauseous, Tessa admitted, but I think that's the pregnancy, not the stress. Gabriel's hand moved protectively to her stomach, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the photographers documenting their every move. Gabriel, shouted a reporter, is it true that your assistant was investigating you? Is your relationship a sham? Gabriel stopped walking and turned to face the cameras, his arms still around Tessa's waist. Tessa White is the woman I love and the mother of my unborn child, Gabriel said clearly, his voice carrying over the crowd. Our relationship is real. Our commitment to each other is absolute, and anyone who suggests otherwise is mistaken. As they drove away from the courthouse, Tessa marveled at Gabriel's composure under pressure. Even facing potential prison time, even with his reputation in ruins, he had publicly claimed her and their child without hesitation. That was brave, Tessa said as Gabriel navigated through traffic. That was necessary. Gabriel corrected. I won't let anyone suggest that what we have isn't real or that our baby was conceived under false pretenses. Gabriel, what if the trial doesn't go well? What if you're convicted? Gabriel was quiet for a moment, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. Then I'll serve my sentence and come home to you. Tessa, I'm not going to lie and say I'm not scared. I am. But I'm also not going to let fear dictate how we live our lives. I love you, Tessa said simply. Gabriel reached over to take her hand. I love you too, both of you. As they drove toward an uncertain future, Tessa felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. The next few months would be difficult. A federal trial, media scrutiny, the challenges of pregnancy and early motherhood. But they would face it together, as a family, with the kind of love that had already survived deception, betrayal, and the weight of unforgivable mistakes. Maybe that love would be strong enough to survive whatever came next. 3 weeks after Gabriel's arrest, as the media frenzy began to subside into a low simmer of ongoing coverage, Gabriel surprised Tessa with an unexpected proposal. Come away with me this weekend, Gabriel said as they sat in his apartment, reviewing legal documents that seemed to multiply daily. Just the two of us, somewhere we can breathe. Tessa looked up from the witness statements Sarah Chen had asked her to review. Gabriel, you can't leave the city. Your bail conditions allow travel within a 200-mile radius with court permission, Gabriel finished, which I have already obtained. The Hamptons house has been in my family for 20 years. I thought we could use some time away from the lawyers and reporters and endless phone calls. Tessa studied Gabriel's face, noting the stress lines that had appeared since his arrest and the way he seemed to carry tension in his shoulders constantly now. The past few weeks had been brutal. Aggressive media coverage, threatening letters from strangers, and the slow, grinding machinery of federal prosecution building its case against him. What about your mother? Tessa asked. Dorothy had been staying at Gabriel's apartment since her health scare, and while she was recovering physically, the stress of Gabriel's legal troubles was clearly taking its toll. She's going to stay with her sister in Connecticut for the weekend. She thinks we need time alone together. Gabriel's expression softened. She also wants to give you a chance to rest. She's worried that the stress is too much for someone in your condition. Tessa's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach. At 8 weeks pregnant, she wasn't showing yet, but the morning sickness had been relentless, made worse by the anxiety of Gabriel's legal situation. Sarah Chen thinks it's a good idea too, Gabriel continued. She says we need to prepare for the possibility that the trial will last months, that there will be periods when we can't be together as much as we'd like. This might be our last chance for privacy for a while. The weight of that statement settled over Tessa like a heavy blanket. Gabriel's trial was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, and the federal prosecutors were asking for significant prison time. If convicted, Gabriel could face up to 15 years in federal prison. 15 years. Their child would be a teenager before Gabriel was free. Okay, Tessa said quietly. Let's go. The drive to the Hamptons took 3 hours through increasingly rural landscape, with Gabriel's usual security detail following at a discreet distance, a new reality since Gabriel had received several credible threats following his arrest. They spent Friday evening on the terrace, sharing dinner while watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in weeks, they talked about things other than legal strategy and media coverage, about their childhoods, their dreams for their unborn child, their hopes for the future despite the uncertainty surrounding them. Have you thought about names? Gabriel asked as they sat wrapped in blankets against the evening chill. Tessa smiled, her hand moving to her stomach. A little. What about you? If it's a boy, I'd like to name him Marcus, Gabriel said quietly. After your father. Tessa's breath caught. Gabriel, you don't have to. I want to, Gabriel said firmly. Your father was a good man who deserved better than what happened to him. If we have a son, I want him to carry Marcus White's name and to know the story of the grandfather who died too soon. Tears filled Tessa's eyes. What if it's a girl? Gabriel was quiet for a moment, considering. Elena, maybe? After your mother? You've really thought about this. I've thought about everything, Gabriel admitted. "The nursery we'll set up, the stories I'll tell him or her, the kind of father I want to be. I know there's a chance I might not be there for the early years, but I'm determined to be the kind of father your child deserves, even if I have to do it from prison." The reminder of Gabriel's legal situation cast a shadow over their peaceful evening. But Tessa pushed the anxiety aside. This weekend was about them, about their relationship and their growing family, not about federal prosecutors and potential prison sentences. Saturday morning brought perfect autumn weather, crisp and clear with the kind of brilliant blue sky that made everything seem possible. Gabriel woke Tessa with coffee and fresh pastries from the local bakery, insisting on serving her breakfast in bed. "You're spoiling me," Tessa protested as Gabriel arranged pillows behind her back. "I'm taking care of you and our baby," Gabriel corrected. "There's a difference." As Tessa sipped her coffee, she watched Gabriel move around the bedroom with easy familiarity. He looked younger here, more relaxed, and she could see glimpses of the man he might have been if he hadn't taken on so much responsibility so young. "Gabriel," Tessa said softly, "do you ever regret the choices that led us here?" Gabriel stopped arranging flowers in a vase and turned to look at her. "Which choices?" "All of them. Taking over the company so young, making the decision that killed my father, meeting me." Gabriel set down the vase and came to sit on the edge of the bed, his hand covering hers. "Tessa, I regret the decision that cost your father his life every day. I regret that my inexperience and poor judgment resulted in tragedy for 3 families. I regret that I was too much of a coward to face those families and take responsibility for years." Gabriel's thumb brushed across her knuckles as he continued. "But I don't regret meeting you. I don't regret falling in love with you. And I sure as hell don't regret that you're having my baby. Whatever consequences I face for my mistakes, whatever happens with the trial, you and our child are the best things that have ever happened to me." Tessa leaned forward to kiss him, marveling at how Gabriel could make her feel cherished and protected, even in the midst of chaos. They spent the day walking on the beach, Gabriel pointing out childhood landmarks and sharing stories about summers spent at the estate. Tessa found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't since Gabriel's arrest. The constant anxiety about media coverage and legal strategies fading into background noise. As evening approached, Gabriel built a fire in the living room fireplace, while Tessa curled up on the couch with a book. The domestic tranquility felt almost surreal after weeks of crisis management and public scrutiny. "Tessa," Gabriel said as he settled beside her on the couch, "there's something I want to give you." Gabriel produced a small velvet box from his pocket, and Tessa's heart began to race. "Gabriel, if this is—" "It's not what you think," Gabriel said quickly, though his nervous expression suggested it might be exactly what she thought. "Well, it is and it isn't." Gabriel opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond ring, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the firelight and threw rainbows across the ceiling. "Gabriel," Tessa breathed, her hand flying to her throat. "I know the timing is terrible," Gabriel said, his words tumbling over each other in his nervousness. "I know we're facing a trial, that I might go to prison, that bringing a child into this situation seems impossible. But Tessa, I also know that I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." Gabriel slid off the couch and onto one knee beside her, the ring box trembling slightly in his hands. "I know you came into my life to destroy me, and instead you saved me. You made me face the truth about what I'd done, forced me to take responsibility for my mistakes, and somehow managed to love me despite everything." Gabriel's voice broke slightly. "You're carrying my child, Tessa. You're giving me the greatest gift I could ever imagine, even knowing what it might cost us both." Tessa felt tears streaming down her face as Gabriel continued. "I can't promise you an easy life. I can't promise that I won't go to prison, or that the media will leave us alone, or that raising our child won't be the hardest thing we ever do. But I can promise you that I will love you and our baby with everything I have, for as long as I live." Gabriel's hazel eyes met hers directly. "Tessa White, will you marry me?" For a moment, Tessa couldn't speak. The ring was beautiful. Gabriel's words were everything she had dreamed of hearing, but the weight of their circumstances seemed to press down on her like a physical force. "Gabriel," Tessa said softly, You're about to go on trial for federal crimes. You could spend the next 15 years in prison. Are you sure you want to tie your life to mine when everything is so uncertain?" Gabriel's expression was fierce with determination. "Tessa, you are the only certainty I have. You and our baby are the only things that matter. Whatever happens with the trial, whatever sentence I might face, I want to face it as your husband." Gabriel reached out to touch her face gently. "But if you need time to think about it—" "Yes," Tessa interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel's eyes widened. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you," Tessa said, her voice growing stronger. "Gabriel Ellsworth, I came into your life planning to destroy you, and instead I fell so deeply in love with you that I can't imagine a future without you in it. Prison or no prison, trial or no trial, scandal or no scandal, yes, I'll marry you." Gabriel's hands shook as he slipped the ring onto Tessa's finger, the perfect fit suggesting he had been planning this moment for weeks. When he kissed her, it was with the desperate intensity of a man who knew their time together might be limited, who wanted to memorize every moment before the world intruded again. "I love you," Gabriel whispered against her lips. "God, Tessa, I love you so much." "I love you too," Tessa replied, marveling at how the ring felt on her finger. Solid, real, a tangible promise of the future they were building together, despite impossible odds. They spent Saturday evening planning their wedding, discussing intimate ceremonies and simple celebrations that could work around Gabriel's legal restrictions. Gabriel wanted to marry her immediately before the trial began so that no matter what happened in court, they would be legally bound together. "What if we get married here?" Gabriel suggested, as they walked on the beach under a canopy of stars. "Small ceremony, just our immediate family. Your mother and sister, my mother, maybe Sarah Chen as a witness." "When?" Tessa asked, though she already knew the answer. "Next weekend, before the media attention intensifies, before the trial preparations consume everything." Gabriel stopped walking and turned to face her. "Tessa, I know it seems rushed, but I don't want to wait. I want to marry you while we still have some control over our circumstances." Tessa considered the proposal. A simple wedding at the family estate, surrounded by the people who mattered most, before their lives became completely dominated by legal proceedings and media scrutiny. "Next weekend," Tessa agreed. "But Gabriel, what about the prenup? Your lawyers will insist." "No prenup," Gabriel said firmly. "Whatever happens to me, whatever assets I have, I want them to be yours and our child's. If I go to prison, I want you to have everything you need to build a life for our family." The generosity of the gesture, the complete trust it represented, made Tessa's chest ache with love, and something that felt dangerously close to grief. Gabriel was planning for a future where he might not be present, ensuring she and their child would be protected, even if he couldn't be there to provide for them himself. Sunday morning brought the intrusion of reality in the form of phone calls from Sarah Chen, with trial updates and messages from reporters seeking comment on Gabriel's upcoming court appearances. But before they left the sanctuary of the Hamptons, Gabriel had one more surprise. "There's something else I want to show you," Gabriel said as they packed their bags. He led Tessa to a small room off the master bedroom that she hadn't noticed before. A cozy space with built-in bookshelves and a window seat overlooking the ocean. "This was my nursery when I was little," Gabriel said quietly. "My mother used to read to me here before bedtime. I thought, if you like it, we could set up our baby's nursery here, for when we visit." The room was perfect, sunny and peaceful, with enough space for a crib and changing table, close enough to the master bedroom for nighttime feedings. Tessa could picture their child playing on the soft carpet while ocean breezes drifted through the windows. "It's beautiful," Tessa said, her hand moving to her stomach. "But Gabriel, what if you can't be here? What if you're in prison when our baby is born?" Gabriel's arms came around her from behind, his hands covering hers on her stomach. "Then you'll bring our child here, and you'll tell him or her about Daddy, who loves them more than anything in the world. You'll show them the room where their father played as a little boy, and you'll know that even if I can't be there physically, this place will always be theirs." As they drove back to the city, Tessa felt as if they were leaving a dream and returning to a nightmare. The weekend had been a brief respite from the reality of Gabriel's legal troubles, but now they had to face the final weeks before trial with all the pressure and uncertainty that entailed. The engagement ring on her finger caught the sunlight streaming through the car window, a tangible reminder that despite everything, the federal charges, the media scrutiny, the possibility of years of separation, Gabriel had chosen to bind his life to hers permanently. 2 days later, the news of their engagement leaked to the media, creating a fresh wave of coverage that ranged from romantic to cynical. Some outlets portrayed their relationship as a fairy tale love story born from tragedy and redemption. Others suggested it was a calculated move by Gabriel to gain sympathy before his trial. CEO Mary's assistant who exposed his crimes, read one headline. Love or legal strategy? Questioned another. Gabriel and Tessa ignored the coverage as much as possible, focusing instead on planning their wedding and preparing for the trial that would determine their future. Alina White, Tessa's mother, flew in from Phoenix to help with wedding preparations, her presence both healing and heartbreaking as she met the man who had killed her husband and was now engaged to her daughter. I can't say I understand how this happened, Elena told Tessa privately as they shopped for a simple wedding dress. Part of me is still angry at Gabriel for what he took from our family. But I can also see how much he loves you, how much he regrets what happened. And honey, I can see how happy you are with him. Elena paused, her eyes filling with tears. Your father would want you to be happy. He would want you to find love and build a family, even if it's not the way any of us expected. Dorothy Ellsworth, despite her own reservations about the rushed timeline and difficult circumstances, threw herself into wedding planning with the determination of a woman who understood this might be the last happy occasion her family would share for years. If my son is going to get married while facing federal charges, Dorothy said with characteristic steel, then by God, we're going to do it right. The wedding was planned for the following Saturday, a small ceremony in the garden of the Hamptons estate with only immediate family and a few close friends in attendance. Gabriel's legal team would be present as witnesses, and a local judge who had known the Ellsworth family for decades had agreed to perform the ceremony. As the week progressed, Tessa found herself caught between overwhelming joy at the prospect of marrying Gabriel and crushing anxiety about the trial that would begin just 2 weeks later. The federal prosecutors had made it clear they intended to seek the maximum sentence, viewing Gabriel's case as an opportunity to send a message about corporate accountability. On Thursday evening, 3 days before the wedding, Detective Ray Morrison made an unexpected appearance at Gabriel's apartment. I'm sorry to intrude, Ray said when Tessa answered the door, but I have information that Gabriel needs to hear. Gabriel emerged from his study, where he had been reviewing trial preparations with Sarah Chen. His expression was guarded as he invited Ray into the living room. The prosecution is planning to call you as a witness, Ray told Tessa without preamble. They want you to testify about Gabriel's personal involvement in the safety decisions that led to the construction accident. Tessa felt the blood drain from her face. What? They subpoenaed you this afternoon. Sarah Chen should receive the official notice tomorrow morning. Ray's expression was sympathetic but professional. Tessa, they're going to ask you to choose between protecting Gabriel and telling the truth under oath. Gabriel's jaw clenched. They can't use her testimony. Spousal privilege won't apply until you're actually married, Ray pointed out. And even then, it only protects confidential communications between spouses, not evidence gathered independently. Sarah Chen, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. This changes our entire trial strategy. If Tessa testifies for the prosecution, her evidence could be devastating. If she refuses to cooperate, they could charge her with obstruction of justice. Gabriel stood abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. They're using her as a weapon against me. Gabriel, Tessa said quietly, maybe I should testify. Everyone in the room turned to stare at her. What? Gabriel's voice was sharp with disbelief. Tessa met his eyes steadily. Maybe it's time for the complete truth to come out. In court, under oath, where there can be no question about what really happened or who was responsible. Tessa, if you testify against me, I won't be testifying against you, Tessa interrupted. I'll be testifying for the truth, for my father's memory, for all the families who deserve to know exactly what happened and who was responsible. Gabriel stared at her for a long moment, then sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. Gabriel, Tessa said softly, moving to sit beside him, this is what we've been preparing for. The chance for you to take complete responsibility, to face the consequences of your actions with dignity and courage. If I testify honestly about what I found, about your personal involvement in the decisions that killed my father, then there can be no question that justice is being served. Gabriel looked up at her, his eyes filled with love and something that looked like pride. You're willing to testify against the man you're about to marry? I'm willing to testify for the truth, Tessa corrected. And I'm willing to marry a man who's brave enough to face the consequences of his mistakes, even when those consequences are delivered by the woman he loves. Gabriel reached for her hands, his thumbs tracing over her engagement ring. Tessa, if you testify about my personal involvement, if you provide the evidence they need to convict me, I could go to prison for 15 years. Our child would grow up without a father. Our child will grow up with a father who chose honesty over self-preservation, Tessa replied firmly. A father who took responsibility for his mistakes and accepted the consequences with grace. That's the kind of man I want to marry, Gabriel. That's the kind of father I want for our baby. Ray Morrison, who had been watching their exchange with professional interest, finally spoke. There is another option. Gabriel and Tessa turned to look at him. You could leave, Ray said simply. Both of you. Tonight, I can have you on a plane to a non-extradition country within hours. Gabriel's passport was surrendered, but that's not insurmountable for someone with his resources. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. You could disappear, Ray continued. Start over somewhere new. Raise your child away from all this. Gabriel would never face trial, never go to prison. You could have the life together that you want. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering the possibility. Then he shook his head. No, Gabriel said firmly. I won't run. I won't teach my child that the solution to problems is to avoid responsibility. And I won't ask Tessa to spend the rest of her life as a fugitive because I was too much of a coward to face justice. Gabriel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. 3 men died because of my decisions. Marcus White, David Chen, and Robert Martinez. Their families deserve justice, and I deserve to be held accountable. Running away won't bring them back, and it won't heal the damage I caused. Gabriel turned back to face the room. We're getting married on Saturday. I'm going to trial in 2 weeks, and if the court finds me guilty, I'll serve my sentence knowing that I finally did the right thing. Ray nodded approvingly. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Both of you. As Ray left the apartment, Gabriel and Tessa found themselves alone with the weight of the decision they had made. In 3 days, they would be married. In 2 weeks, Gabriel would go on trial for federal crimes, and if convicted, they would face years of separation while their child grew up visiting Daddy in prison. Are you sure about this? Gabriel asked as they prepared for bed. About marrying me, about testifying, about all of it. Tessa looked at her engagement ring, at the man she loved despite everything, at the future they were building together on a foundation of truth and consequences. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Tessa said. We're going to get married, Gabriel. We're going to face whatever comes next together, and we're going to build a family based on honesty and courage, even if it costs us everything. As they held each other in the darkness, both Gabriel and Tessa understood that they were on the precipice of either the greatest love story of their lives or the most beautiful tragedy. But they also understood that some things, love, truth, justice, redemption, were worth any price. Their wedding was 3 days away. The trial that would determine their future was 2 weeks away. And somewhere between love and justice, between past mistakes and future hopes, Gabriel Ellsworth and Tessa White were about to discover whether their love was strong enough to survive the ultimate test. Have you ever kept a secret that could destroy the person you love most? Tonight's story reaches its stunning climax as love and truth collide in ways that will leave you breathless. The annual charity gala had always been the highlight of the corporate social calendar, but this year it carried the weight of endings. Gabriel stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching 500 of the city's most powerful people move through their elegant rituals, unaware that in 30 minutes their carefully ordered world would explode. Tessa moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her figure hugging midnight blue dress concealing the small bump that was just beginning to show at 12 weeks pregnant. To everyone watching, she appeared to be the perfect corporate wife. Beautiful, poised, supportive of her husband as he faced the trial that would begin in just 1 week. What they couldn't see was the devastating choice she had made, the secret she carried in her small evening purse, or the way her hands trembled every time she thought about what she was about to do. Gabriel's trial was set to begin in 7 days. Despite their beautiful wedding 3 weeks ago at the Hamptons estate, despite the joy of their growing family, the federal prosecutors had made it clear they intended to pursue the maximum sentence. Gabriel could face 15 years in federal prison. But Tessa had discovered something that changed everything. Ladies and gentlemen, the event coordinator's voice echoed through the ballroom. We're ready to begin this evening's program. Gabriel appeared at Tessa's side, devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, his hand automatically moving to the small of her back in the protective gesture that had become second nature since her pregnancy was confirmed. "You look beautiful tonight," Gabriel murmured, his lips brushing her ear. "Though you've been quiet all evening, everything all right?" Tessa looked up at him, memorizing his face, the strong jaw, the hazel eyes that had first captivated her, the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. "Gabriel," Tessa said softly, "I need you to know that whatever happens tonight, I love you more than I ever thought possible." Gabriel's expression grew concerned. "Tessa, you're scaring me. What's wrong?" Before Tessa could answer, Dorothy Ellsworth appeared at Gabriel's other side, elegant in silver silk, her face carefully composed despite the stress of the past months. "They're calling for the speeches to begin," Dorothy said quietly. "Gabriel, you're scheduled to address the group about the Foundation's new safety initiatives." Gabriel nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on Tessa's face. Something in her expression was setting off every alarm bell in his mind. "Tessa," Gabriel said urgently, "what aren't you telling me?" Tessa's hand moved to her small purse, where the documents that would change everything waited. Documents that Detective Ray Morrison had delivered to her just hours ago. Documents that proved the federal investigation had uncovered evidence of a pattern of safety violations across multiple Ellsworth construction sites, evidence that would guarantee Gabriel's conviction and ensure he spent the next 15 years in prison, unless someone else took control of the narrative first. "Gabriel," Tessa whispered, "I'm so sorry." Before Gabriel could ask what she meant, the event coordinator was announcing the evening's speakers, and Gabriel was being guided toward the podium. As he walked away, his eyes kept turning back to Tessa, confusion and concern written across his features. Tessa remained at her table, her heart hammering as Gabriel began his speech about corporate responsibility and the importance of worker safety. Every word felt like a knife, knowing what she was about to do, knowing that in moments she would destroy the man she loved in order to save him. Dorothy Ellsworth moved to sit beside her, her sharp eyes taking in Tessa's pale complexion and trembling hands. "My dear," Dorothy said quietly, "you look like you're about to be sick." "Mrs. Ellsworth," Tessa said, her voice barely audible, "I'm about to do something that will hurt Gabriel terribly, but I need you to know it's because I love him." Dorothy's expression sharpened. "What are you talking about?" Tessa opened her purse and withdrew a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table to Dorothy. As the older woman read, her face went white. "Dear God," Dorothy whispered, "they have everything." The document was a summary of the federal investigation's findings, evidence of safety violations at 7 different Ellsworth construction sites over the past 5 years. Evidence that would paint Gabriel not as a young man who made a single tragic mistake, but as a corporate executive who had systematically chosen profits over worker safety. "It's not true." Tessa said quickly. Gabriel has been implementing the highest safety standards in the industry since the accident 8 years ago. But the prosecution will use this evidence to destroy him completely. They'll paint him as a serial offender who learned nothing from my father's death. Dorothy's hands shook as she set down the paper. What can we do? I can control the narrative, Tessa said simply. I can tell the truth about what really happened 8 years ago, about Gabriel's remorse and his efforts to make amends, before the prosecution twists everything into something ugly. Tessa, Dorothy's voice was sharp with understanding, you're talking about confessing publicly. Here, tonight. I'm talking about taking control of our story before someone else destroys it. Dorothy looked toward the podium where Gabriel was concluding his speech, unaware that his world was about to change forever. He'll never forgive you, Dorothy said quietly. Maybe not, Tessa replied, but our child will grow up knowing that their mother chose truth over convenience, justice over comfort. And maybe someday, Gabriel will understand that I did this because I love him too much to watch him be destroyed by lies. Gabriel finished his speech to polite applause and began making his way back toward their table. But before he could reach them, Tessa was rising from her chair, moving toward the podium with the determined stride of someone who had finally found courage. Ladies and gentlemen, Tessa's voice carried clearly through the ballroom as she reached the microphone. I'm Tessa White Ellsworth, and I have something I need to tell you. The room fell silent, 500 faces turning toward the young woman in the midnight blue dress who stood at the podium with her hands gripping the lectern like a lifeline. Gabriel stopped moving, his face white with dawning understanding. 8 years ago, Tessa began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. My father, Marcus White, died in a construction accident at an Ellsworth Industries worksite. A collective intake of breath swept through the ballroom. In the front row, Gabriel's face was a mask of shock and betrayal. My father died because safety protocols were ignored to meet budget constraints and project deadlines, Tessa continued. 3 good men lost their lives because a 28-year-old CEO, overwhelmed by the pressure to prove himself, approved cost-cutting measures that compromised worker safety. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Gabriel looked like he had been shot. I came to work for Gabriel Ellsworth, planning to destroy him, Tessa said, her voice gaining strength. I spent 8 months gathering evidence of his personal involvement in the decisions that killed my father. I was prepared to use that evidence to ensure he faced the maximum consequences for what he had done. Tessa's eyes found Gabriel's across the crowded room. But something happened that I never expected. I discovered that the man responsible for my father's death was not the monster I had imagined. I found a person who carried the weight of his mistakes every single day, who had spent 8 years trying to honor the memory of the men who died by ensuring it would never happen again. Tears were streaming down Tessa's face now, but her voice never wavered. I fell in love with Gabriel Ellsworth, not because I forgot what he had done, but because I saw who he had become. I married him not in spite of his past, but because of how he chose to face it. Gabriel was moving toward the podium now, his face torn between love and anguish. Gabriel Ellsworth will face federal charges for his role in my father's death, Tessa continued. He will accept responsibility for his actions and whatever consequences the court deems appropriate, but I will not allow his story to be told by people who don't understand the full truth. Tessa's hand moved to her stomach, the gesture visible to everyone in the room. I am carrying Gabriel's child, she announced, her voice ringing with fierce protectiveness. Our baby will grow up knowing that their father was a man who made a terrible mistake when he was young and afraid, but who spent the rest of his life trying to make amends. They will know that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in being perfect, but in facing the consequences of your imperfections with grace. Gabriel reached the podium, his eyes filled with love and devastation. Gabriel Ellsworth is not a perfect man, Tessa said, her eyes locked with his. But he is a good man who deserves to be judged for the totality of his life, not just its worst moment. And whatever the court decides, whatever sentence he faces, I will be proud to call him my husband and the father of my child. Tessa stepped back from the microphone, and for a moment, the ballroom remained in absolute silence. Then Gabriel was pulling her into his arms, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become unmoored. "Tessa," Gabriel whispered against her hair. "What have you done?" "I told the truth," Tessa replied, her voice muffled against his chest. "All of it, before anyone else could twist it into something ugly." Around them, the ballroom erupted into chaos. Reporters shouting questions, guests frantically using their phones, security trying to maintain order. But Gabriel and Tessa remained locked in their embrace, two people who had found love in the midst of truth and were prepared to face whatever consequences came next. Dorothy Ellsworth appeared at their side, her face pale but determined. "We need to leave, now, before this becomes a complete circus." As Gabriel's security team formed a protective barrier around them, Gabriel and Tessa made their way through the crowd toward the exit. The questions from reporters were relentless, but neither of them answered, their focus entirely on each other and the future they had just irrevocably altered. In the car, speeding away from the chaos they had left behind, Gabriel finally spoke. "Tessa," Gabriel said quietly, "you just confessed to a room full of people that you married me while carrying evidence of my crimes. You've made yourself look like either a fool or an accomplice." "I've made myself look like a woman who chose love over revenge," Tessa corrected. "Like someone who understands the difference between justice and destruction." Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights flashing past the window. "The trial starts in a week," Gabriel said finally. "What you did tonight, it won't change the outcome. I'm still going to be convicted. I'm still going to prison." "Maybe," Tessa agreed. "But now everyone knows the complete truth. They know about your remorse, your efforts to make amends, your commitment to safety reforms. When you're sentenced, the judge will have the full picture, not just the prosecution's version of events." Gabriel turned to look at her, his eyes filled with an emotion too complex to name. "You destroyed your own credibility to protect mine," Gabriel said. "Tessa, after tonight, people will question everything about our relationship. They'll wonder if our marriage is real, if your love is genuine, if our child was conceived under false pretenses." "Let them wonder," Tessa said firmly. "The people who matter, our family, our friends, our child, they'll know the truth. That we found real love in impossible circumstances and chose to build something beautiful on a foundation of honesty." Gabriel reached across the seat to take her hand, his thumb tracing over her wedding ring. "I love you," Gabriel said simply, "more than I thought it was possible to love another person, and I'm terrified that I'm about to lose you for the next 15 years. "You're not going to lose me," Tessa replied with fierce conviction. "No matter what happens at trial, no matter what sentence you face, you're not going to lose me. We're a family now, Gabriel. Prison bars can't change that." As they arrived at Gabriel's apartment, they found it surrounded by media vans and reporters. Sarah Chen was waiting in the lobby, her expression grim, but not entirely unsympathetic. "Well," Sarah said as they made their way to the elevator, "that was certainly one way to control the narrative. The prosecution is going to be furious that you got ahead of their story." "Will it help or hurt Gabriel's case?" Tessa asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. "It's complicated. On one hand, your testimony tonight makes you look incredibly biased, which could undermine your credibility as a witness. On the other hand, it humanizes Gabriel in a way that could influence sentencing." "What about the new evidence Ray Morrison showed me?" Tessa asked. "The pattern of safety violations across multiple sites?" Sarah's expression darkened. "That's still going to be devastating. Your confession tonight was powerful, but it doesn't change the fact that the prosecution has evidence of ongoing safety issues under Gabriel's leadership." Gabriel stopped walking. "What evidence?" Tessa pulled the document from her purse and handed it to Gabriel, watching his face as he read the summary of additional charges the prosecution was prepared to bring. "They were going to ambush you with this during the trial," Tessa explained. "Evidence that makes it look like you learned nothing from the accident 8 years ago, that you continued to prioritize profits over safety." Gabriel's face went white as he finished reading. "These are all incidents that were remediated immediately. We've exceeded federal safety standards at every site for the past 5 years. But the prosecution will argue that the violations occurred in the first place, Sarah pointed out. They'll paint a picture of systematic disregard for worker safety. Gabriel sank into a chair in his apartment, the full weight of his situation finally hitting him. 15 years, Gabriel said quietly. They're going to give me 15 years. Tessa knelt beside his chair, her hands covering his. Gabriel, listen to me. You are not the same man who made those decisions 8 years ago. You've spent every day since then trying to honor my father's memory and protect other workers. That has to count for something. Does it? Gabriel's voice was filled with despair. Tessa, our child will be 15 years old before I'm free. You'll be raising our baby alone, dealing with the stigma of being married to a convicted felon. How is that fair to either of you? Tessa's hands moved to frame Gabriel's face, forcing him to look at her. Gabriel Ellsworth, Tessa said firmly, I didn't marry you expecting life to be easy. I married you because I love the man you are today, because I respect the way you've tried to make amends for your mistakes, and because I believe our child deserves a father who chooses truth over convenience. Tessa's voice grew stronger as she continued. If you go to prison, I will bring our baby to visit you every chance I get. I will tell them stories about their daddy, who made a terrible mistake, but spent his life trying to make it right. And when you come home, whenever that is, we will be waiting for you. Gabriel pulled Tessa into his lap, holding her as if she were the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. How did I get so lucky? Gabriel whispered. How did the daughter of the man I killed become the woman who saved my soul? Maybe, Tessa said softly, some mistakes are so big that only love can heal them. Maybe we found each other because we both needed to learn that forgiveness is possible, that redemption is real, and that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most broken places. Over the following week, as Gabriel's trial began, the media coverage was unlike anything either of them had experienced. Tessa's confession at the charity gala had reframed the entire narrative, transforming what might have been a straightforward corporate crime story into something far more complex and emotionally charged. The prosecution struggled to present Tessa as a credible witness, given her obvious bias and her marriage to the defendant. But Tessa's testimony was devastating in its honesty. She presented the evidence she had gathered with clinical precision, never attempting to minimize Gabriel's culpability or excuse his actions. Gabriel Ellsworth personally approved the safety modifications that resulted in my father's death, Tessa testified, her voice steady, despite the emotional weight of her words. He was inexperienced, under pressure, and made a decision that cost 3 good men their lives. But Tessa also testified about Gabriel's remorse, his efforts to make amends, and his commitment to ensuring such tragedies never happened again. The man I married is not the same man who made those decisions 8 years ago, Tessa said from the witness stand. He carries the weight of his mistakes every day, and he has spent 8 years trying to honor the memory of the men who died by becoming someone worthy of their forgiveness. Alina White, Tessa's mother, requested permission to address the court. Your Honor, Alina said, rising from the gallery, my husband Marcus was one of the men who died because of Gabriel Ellsworth's decisions. For 8 years, I have carried anger and grief and a desire for justice that consumed my life. Alina's voice trembled but remained strong. When I learned that my daughter had fallen in love with the man responsible for her father's death, I was horrified. I couldn't understand how she could forgive him, how she could build a life with him. Alina looked directly at Gabriel. But over the past year, I have watched Gabriel Ellsworth face the consequences of his actions with courage and honesty. I have seen the remorse he carries, the changes he has made, the way he loves my daughter and their unborn child. Alina's eyes filled with tears. I cannot speak for the other families affected by this tragedy, but I can speak for myself and for my husband's memory. Gabriel Ellsworth deserves to face consequences for his actions, but he also deserves the chance to continue the work of redemption he has already begun. Elena sat down, and the courtroom remained silent for a long moment. When Judge Patricia Hamilton announced Gabriel's sentence, the courtroom was packed with media, family members, and supporters from both sides. "Mr. Ellsworth," Judge Hamilton said, "you have been convicted of serious crimes that resulted in the deaths of 3 men and immeasurable pain for their families. Your actions as a young CEO, driven by inexperience and poor judgment, had tragic consequences that cannot be undone." Gabriel stood beside his attorney, Tessa directly behind him in the gallery, her hand resting on her now visible pregnancy bump. "However," Judge Hamilton continued, "this court has also heard extensive testimony about your efforts over the past 8 years to make amends for your actions. Your implementation of industry-leading safety protocols, your anonymous support for victims' families, and your complete cooperation with this investigation demonstrate genuine remorse and a commitment to ensuring such tragedies never occur again." Gabriel's hands remained steady at his sides, though Tessa could see the tension in his shoulders from where she sat. "The court has also considered the extraordinary circumstances of this case," Judge Hamilton said, glancing toward Tessa in the gallery. "The testimony of Mrs. Ellsworth, whose father was among the victims, provides unique insight into both the gravity of your crimes and the authenticity of your remorse." Judge Hamilton paused, her eyes moving between Gabriel and Tessa. "This court sentences you to 7 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years, contingent upon your continued cooperation with safety oversight programs and victim family support initiatives." The courtroom erupted in a mixture of gasps and murmurs. 7 years, not the 15 that the prosecution had sought, but still a devastating separation for a young family. Gabriel's knees nearly buckled with relief and anguish combined. 7 years meant their child would be in elementary school when he was released. It meant birthdays missed, first steps unseen, bedtime stories told through prison phones instead of whispered in darkened nurseries. But it also meant hope. It meant the possibility of redemption, of a future where love could triumph over the weight of past mistakes. As the bailiff approached to lead Gabriel away, he turned to find Tessa's eyes across the courtroom. The love he saw there, unwavering despite everything, gave him the strength to face what came next. "I love you," Gabriel mouthed silently. "I love you too," Tessa whispered back, her hand protective over their child. "We'll be waiting for you." 5 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Gabriel Ellsworth walked through the gates of federal prison as a free man. The world he stepped into was different from the one he had left. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, but his eyes held a peace that hadn't been there before. Tessa waited by the car with 4-year-old Marcus White Ellsworth, a beautiful boy with his father's hazel eyes and his mother's determined chin. The child had Gabriel's drawings from prison covering his bedroom walls, pictures of dragons and castles and stick figures labeled Daddy, Mommy, and Me. "Is that really Daddy?" Marcus asked, his small hand tight in his mother's as they watched the tall man walking toward them. "Yes, baby," Tessa whispered, tears streaming down her face. "That's your daddy coming home." Gabriel's first steps as a free man carried him straight into the arms of his family. He lifted his son for the first time outside of a prison visiting room, marveling at how much the boy had grown, how real he felt in his arms. "You're bigger than in the pictures," Gabriel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Mommy said you were building houses for people who needed them," Marcus said, with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who had never known a world where his father wasn't away serving his sentence. "But now you can build them at home." Gabriel looked at Tessa over their son's head, amazed by how she had transformed their tragedy into something a child could understand and accept without shame. During Gabriel's incarceration, Tessa had not simply waited. She had completed her law degree, specializing in corporate accountability and victim advocacy. She had established the Marcus White Foundation, which provided legal support for families affected by workplace accidents, and lobbied for stronger safety regulations. She had also visited Gabriel every week without fail, bringing Marcus from the time he was old enough to travel. Their son knew his father through weekend visits, daily phone calls, and the bedtime stories Gabriel told through the prison telephone system. The Ellsworth Company had not merely survived Gabriel's absence, it had thrived under new leadership that implemented the most comprehensive worker safety programs in the industry. Every construction site bore a plaque honoring Marcus White, David Chen, and Robert Martinez, and their families received ongoing support through the company's victim assistance program. How does it feel? Tessa asked as they drove toward home, the same Hamptons estate where they had been married, now transformed into a true family home with a nursery overlooking the ocean. Gabriel reached across to take her hand, his wedding ring catching the sunlight. They had renewed their vows by telephone on their second anniversary, with Gabriel speaking his promises from prison while Tessa stood in their nursery, holding their infant son. Like a second chance, Gabriel said simply, like the beginning of the rest of our lives. That evening, as they tucked Marcus into bed in the nursery Gabriel had dreamed about during long prison nights, their son looked up at his father with serious eyes. "Mommy says you made a big mistake before I was born," Marcus said, with the directness of childhood. Gabriel's breath caught. He and Tessa had agreed to always tell their son age-appropriate versions of the truth. But hearing it from Marcus's lips still stopped his heart. "Yes, I did," Gabriel said quietly. "I made a decision that hurt people, including your grandfather Marcus that you're named after. But you said sorry and tried to fix it?" "Yes, I did. I'm still trying to fix it," Marcus nodded solemnly. "Mommy says when we make mistakes, we have to be brave and say sorry and try to do better." Gabriel looked at his son, this beautiful boy who had been born into a world of public scandal and imprisonment, yet somehow emerged with a pure understanding of redemption and second chances. "That's exactly right," Gabriel said, his voice thick with emotion. "And do you know what the best part is?" "What?" "Even when we make big mistakes, the people who love us don't stop loving us. They help us be better." Marcus smiled and reached up to hug his father. "Like Mommy helped you?" "Exactly like Mommy helped me." Later that night, as Gabriel and Tessa lay in their own bed for the first time in 5 years, they talked about the future. Gabriel would return to the company in a limited capacity, focusing on safety oversight and victim advocacy. They would continue the Foundation's work, expanding its reach to help more families affected by corporate negligence. But mostly, they would simply be a family. They would have lazy Sunday mornings and bedtime stories told in person. They would teach Marcus to swim in the ocean beyond their windows and help him build sandcastles on the beach where his parents had first planned their wedding. "Do you ever regret it?" Gabriel asked as they watched the moonlight dance on the water. "Choosing me over justice, love over revenge?" Tessa turned in his arms, her face illuminated by the soft light filtering through their bedroom windows. "Gabriel, look what we built. Look at Marcus, look at the Foundation. Look at the changes in the company. Look at the families who've been helped, the workers who are safer because of what happened to us." She traced her finger along his jaw, marveling at how familiar it still felt despite the years apart. "We didn't choose love over justice. We chose love as the path to justice. We chose redemption over destruction. And we proved that sometimes the most broken things can become the most beautiful." Gabriel pulled her closer, his heart full of gratitude for this woman who had walked into his life planning to destroy him and instead had saved his soul. "The daughter of the man I killed became the mother of my child," Gabriel said wonderfully. "How is that possible?" "Because love is stronger than hatred," Tessa replied simply. "Because forgiveness is more powerful than revenge. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the most impossible circumstances." As they fell asleep in each other's arms, Gabriel and Tessa knew that their story wasn't ending, it was beginning. They had faced the ultimate test of love and emerged stronger, not despite their struggles, but because of them. In the nursery down the hall, 4-year-old Marcus White Ellsworth slept peacefully, dreaming of dragons and castles and families that stayed together no matter what. He was the living proof that love could triumph over even the deepest wounds, that redemption was possible, and that sometimes the most beautiful families were forged in the fire of impossible choices. Outside their windows, the ocean that had witnessed their first kiss continued its eternal dance, carrying away the pain of the past and bringing hope for the future. And somewhere in the stars above, Marcus White looked down on the family that bore his name and knew that his sacrifice had not been in vain, that his death had somehow, impossibly, become the foundation for a love story that would inspire others for generations to come. Gabriel Ellsworth had learned that true strength wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about facing them with courage. Tessa had learned that justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about transformation. And together, they had proven that love wasn't just about passion. It was about the choice to keep choosing each other, even when that choice cost everything. Their love story began with tragedy and deception, but it ended with truth and redemption. It was a testament to the power of second chances, the possibility of forgiveness, and the truth that sometimes the most beautiful things in life grow from the most broken places. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey tonight, my beautiful royal story family. Stories like this remind us that love isn't always simple, that justice isn't always straightforward, and that the most powerful force in the universe is the human capacity for growth, forgiveness, and redemption. I'm curious, have you ever faced an impossible choice between love and justice? Have you ever discovered that forgiveness was more powerful than revenge? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your stories inspire every tale I tell. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that second chances are possible, that love can triumph over the deepest wounds, and that the most beautiful families are sometimes forged in the most unlikely circumstances. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because tomorrow I have another passionate story of hearts colliding against impossible odds. Until then, remember that you are worthy of love, capable of growth, and deserving of redemption, no matter what mistakes you've made in your past. Sweet dreams, my beautiful family. May your own love stories be filled with the courage to choose truth over convenience, love over fear, and hope over despair. Good night.